$340 million was being decided over sparkling water Imara had poured herself, and not one of the 4 men in the room knew her name. She stood in the far corner of the Monarch Suite's private boardroom, a chilled baccarat pitcher sweating into her palm, her feet aching inside the stiff black flats that the Kessler Hotel required all event staff to wear. The room smelled of leather chairs, fresh printer ink, and the kind of ambition that doesn't apologize for itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a steel-grey Lake Ontario, the CN Tower rising in the distance like a needle threading the winter sky. Across the mahogany table sat Morton Haas, the founder of Haas Capital Developments. He was 61 years old, deeply tanned in a way that made no geographical sense in February, and wore a watch that probably cost more than Imara's father's entire pension. Haas had the kind of smile that arrived before the rest of his face caught up to it, calculated, preloaded. Across from him sat Darian Cross. Cross Capital Partners occupied 4 floors of a Bay Street tower and had recently been ranked the 3rd largest private equity firm in Canada by assets under management. Darian Cross himself was 42, with dark hair threaded through with the first hints of grey and the kind of stillness that unsettled people who weren't expecting it. He wasn't loud, he didn't fidget, he simply occupied the room's gravity, and everything else arranged itself accordingly. Behind him stood a man Imara only knew as Reeve, 6 feet of pressed dark wool and deliberate silence. He didn't look at the paperwork, he looked at Haas's hands. Imara moved forward. Her job was to be invisible, pour, retreat, vanish. She was the Kessler's senior corporate events coordinator, which sounded impressive until you were the one replacing water glasses during a $500 million acquisition signing. She refilled Haas's glass first, her eyes correctly averted, her posture professionally neutral. She had practiced this kind of controlled invisibility for 4 years. Ever since she'd walked out of the Rotman School of Management's accounting program in her 2nd year and walked into the nearest job that didn't require a finished degree. She moved to Cross's side of the table. The acquisition binder was open in front of him, thick cream-colored paper tabbed and flagged in yellow. Schedule C was visible, the depreciation and tax liability appendix. Cross was reviewing a clause near the bottom of the page, his pen held loosely between 2 fingers, not yet pressed to the signature line. Imara began to pour. It was a reflexive habit, and she couldn't fully suppress it, the same way someone who grew up playing piano still taps rhythms on tabletops 30 years later. Her eyes skimmed the upside-down columns of figures. Financial statements were a second language to her. She had learned to read them in both directions. She stopped pouring. The water crested dangerously close to the rim of the crystal glass. She caught it in time. Nobody noticed. She read the figure again. Schedule C, subsection 4, the accumulated depreciation column for the Haas Harbor development properties, the assets Cross Capital Partners was absorbing in the merger. The numbers were structured to look like a standard cost basis adjustment. Clean, technical, forgettable. The kind of thing that got skimmed over because it sat between 2 more interesting pages. But the depreciation schedule was inverted, not by design. Imara recognized the architecture of it immediately. She had written a case study on similar structures in her 2nd year at Rotman, in Dr. Patel's corporate tax seminar. The figures were constructed so that if any of Haas's harbor properties were subsequently audited by the CRA, the tax liability, including years of unreported depreciation that Haas had already quietly claimed, would, under the language of this schedule, roll forward into the acquiring entity, into Cross Capital, into Darian Cross. Haas wasn't selling him a portfolio. He was selling him his own tax fraud, gift-wrapped in a merger agreement. Cross uncapped his pen. Imara was supposed to step back. She was supposed to return to her corner, keep her eyes on the middle distance, and wait for someone to want more sparkling water. She had rent due on Friday. She had her father's physiotherapy invoice sitting on her kitchen counter, the one the insurance company was contesting for the 3rd consecutive month since his stroke. She had 4 years of professional invisibility built up, carefully maintained, never once punctured. Cross pressed the pen to the paper. Her voice came out before the rest of her caught up to it. "Mr. Cross, I'm sorry that schedule is fraudulent." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The pen stopped. Darian Cross did not look up immediately. He simply went very still, the way a compass needle pauses before it finds north. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Haas let out a sound that was half law, half bark. "Excuse me." He turned in his chair, his face already reddening. "What did you just— Who is this? Someone get the manager." "Who are you?" Cross asked. He had turned his head but not his body. His voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who has learned not to perform urgency, She held the picture in both hands. I coordinate events for the hotel. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoken. I'll stay. It's the way people say stop when they see someone about to step into traffic. Not a command, a reflex. Haas slammed his folder shut. This is completely out of line. Morton. Cross's tone didn't change. It simply became slightly more precise. If you say one more word before I've finished thinking, I'm going to ask Reeve to escort you to the elevator. And we will both know that is not how this afternoon was supposed to end for you. Haas closed his mouth. Cross turned fully to face Imara. He studied her the way she had been studying the spreadsheet, not unkindly, but without any veneer of social performance. He looked at her flat shoes, her Kessler Hotel lanyard, the dark circles under her eyes that foundation hadn't entirely corrected. "Show me," he said. Imara set the picture down on the side table. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was not. She walked to the table and leaned in, pointing to Schedule C without touching the paper. It was easier if she thought of it as a classroom, if she pretended this was a seminar and she was simply presenting her analysis. Subsection 4. Her voice found its footing. The accumulated depreciation for the harbor properties. The way it's structured here, cross-referenced with the liability clause in Schedule A, paragraph 9, it looks like a standard cost basis adjustment. But the calculation is reversed. You're not inheriting a clean asset base. You're inheriting Haas Capital's historical depreciation gap. Cross looked at the page. The CRA allows a 10-year look-back on unreported depreciation, Imara continued quietly. If this acquisition closes and the harbor properties are audited, which they will be, given their public profile, the assessors won't look to Haas Capital. They'll look to the current holding entity. That's Cross Capital Partners. He's not selling you a property portfolio. He's selling you the tax bill he's been hiding for a decade. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the silence before. Haas shoved back from the table. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's hotel staff, for God's sake. Reeve moved. He crossed the room in 4 steps, took Haas by the shoulder, not aggressively but with the absolute finality of a closing door, and walked him firmly to the far wall. Haas sputtered. He tried to argue. Reeve said nothing. He simply maintained his position until Haas ran out of objections and stood there, flushed and silenced, looking like a man watching his luggage disappear on the wrong carousel. Cross read Schedule C again. Then he read paragraph 9 of Schedule A. He read it a second time, and Imara watched his jaw tighten, a small, precise movement, like the hairline crack in a wall that tells you the foundation has shifted. He capped his pen, slid it into the breast pocket of his jacket, closed the binder with one hand. "Morton," he said without looking up, "Reeve is going to take you down to the lobby. I suggest you spend the time in the car thinking carefully about which of your lawyers thought this was going to work." Haas straightened his cuffs. He picked up his briefcase with the dignity of a man who has decided his exit will be graceful even if nothing else was. The door clicked shut behind them. Then it was just Darian Cross and Imara Weston in a room with $340 million worth of unsigned paperwork. Imara picked up the water pitcher. She had no idea what else to do with her hands. "Sit down," Cross said. He gestured to the chair Haas had vacated. He said it the way he'd said everything else, without warmth or coldness, simply as a statement of what was going to happen next. Imara sat on the very edge of the chair. Cross poured water into his own glass, then looked at her steadily. "Where did you study?" "Rotman, U of T Accounting," she paused. "I didn't finish." "Why?" "My father had a stroke." She said it without softening it. "Our insurance company found a clause in his policy that excluded the treatment he needed. I couldn't afford the tuition and the out-of-pocket bills at the same time." Something shifted in Cross's expression. Not pity, something more considered than that. "You caught something in 30 seconds that my legal team missed in 2 weeks of due diligence," he said. "What are your father's outstanding medical costs?" Imara looked at him. "I'm not comfortable with that question," she said. A faint, unexpected smile crossed Cross's face. It lasted about a second. "Good. That means you have standards. It's a habit worth protecting." He folded his hands on the table. "I am not trying to make you uncomfortable, Miss Weston. I am trying to understand what it would cost to compensate you appropriately for what you just did." "I didn't do anything exceptional. I just read the page." "Everyone in that room had read the page," Cross said. "You were the only one who understood it." The number lived in the back of her skull every single day. It was there when she woke at 3 a.m, unable to sleep. It was there when she transferred money from her savings account in careful increments that never quite kept up with the invoices. $96,000, she said quietly, and the ongoing physiotherapy, maybe another 40 over the next 2 years. Cross opened a document on his phone. He turned it toward her, a transfer authorization form from a legitimate numbered holding company. He typed in a figure and slid the phone across the table. The number on the screen was $180,000. "Pay the hospital," he said. "Keep the remainder for what comes next." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "On Monday morning, you are going to call my office and speak to my assistant. I need a financial analyst who reads upside-down acquisition schedules the way other people read headlines. When you finish your CPA designation, come back to me with the results. Until then, I have an opening in my internal review team that requires precisely the kind of attention to detail you demonstrated today." He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "What you did required courage, Miss Weston," he said without turning around. "Most people see a trap and decide it isn't their problem. I find that quality very difficult to replace." The door closed. Imara sat alone in the Monarch suite for a long moment, the unsigned merger agreement stacked neatly on the table, the city lying cold and enormous beyond the glass. She looked at the transfer authorization still glowing on the phone screen. Then she looked at her own reflection in the dark window, the hotel lanyard, the flat shoes, the woman who had never quite decided whether to stop running from the life she'd planned. She picked up her water pitcher and walked out of the room. The next 18 months moved at a pace that left bruises. Imara left the Kessler 2 weeks after the Monarch Suite incident. She enrolled in a CPA bridging program at night, studying from 10 to 2 in the morning after 8-hour days at Cross Capital's Bay Street offices, where her official title was Internal Review Analyst and her unofficial function was catching every financial irregularity that a team of 42 credentialed accountants had trained themselves not to see. She was good at it, frighteningly good at it, and she knew that, and she worked anyway, because being frightening good at something and having proof of it were 2 different countries. Her father's physiotherapy bills disappeared. The insurance company received a legal notice drafted by Cross Capital's in-house counsel, a single letter, 3 paragraphs, citing the specific clause of the statutory conditions for accident and sickness insurance that the company had improperly applied. The denial was reversed within 48 hours. Her father called her that evening, his speech still slightly slowed from the stroke, and asked if she had done something. She told him she had just found a loophole. He laughed, and it was the first time she had heard him laugh without restraint since before he'd fallen ill. She did not go to parties. She did not sleep more than 5 hours. She wore the same 4 suits on rotation and ate lunch at her desk and filed internal audit reports that were, she was told by Cross's senior partner, unnecessarily thorough. She took this as a compliment. Cross himself was a study in controlled contrasts. In client meetings, he was meticulous and cool. In their one-on-one sessions, which happened twice a week in his corner office on the 49th floor, he was direct, occasionally dry, and entirely devoid of the social performance that characterized everyone else at his level. He never asked how she was doing. He asked what she had found, and then he listened with complete attention, and he never once talked over her. It was, she decided, the most respectful professional relationship she had ever had. It was also becoming something she didn't have clean language for. She told herself it was professional admiration. She told herself this with the same discipline she applied to everything else. On a Tuesday evening in March, when she was alone in her office at 11:30 at night, and she looked up to find Cross standing in her doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, holding 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen on 48. He set one on her desk without asking if she wanted it. "You've been here since 7, he said. "You've been here since 6, she replied, not looking away from her screen. He sat down across from her. He looked at the documents spread across her desk and did not comment on the quantity. "What did you find?" "I've been running the offshore incorporation records for the Alberta subsidiaries," she said. 3 of them were registered using the same registered agent, a numbered company in Calgary that Haas Capital also uses. It's subtle enough that it doesn't appear in a standard due diligence search, but if you cross-reference the CRA's corporate registry with the provincial incorporation filings. Haas used the same shell infrastructure, Cross said. He's been layering assets through these companies since at least 2019. Imara turned the monitor back, the properties he tried to transfer to you in the merger. Some of the underlying title chains trace back through these same Alberta shells. If FinTrack ran a full trace on the beneficial ownership, they'd find his fingerprints on at least 4 properties that appear clean on the surface. Cross was quiet. "You've been building a map," he said. I didn't intend to. I was auditing our own holdings for risk exposure. This was adjacent. He looked at her for a long moment. The office was very quiet. The city hummed 49 floors below them. Haas knows we didn't close the acquisition, Cross said. He knows why, and he has enough reach in this city to be inconvenient. He picked up his coffee. Be careful with what you found, Imara, and be careful with where you keep it. She noted that he had used her first name. He almost never used her first name during work hours. 3 weeks later, Morten Haas moved first. The call came from the Kessler Hotel's general manager, a man who had no reason to contact her, who informed her in a carefully neutral voice that certain financial irregularities had been discovered in the hotel's corporate events budget during the period of her employment, and that her records had been subpoenaed by Fintrack as part of a broader financial review. Imara put down the phone and sat very still for 45 seconds. Then she called Cross's direct line. He planted it, she said when Cross picked up. The event budget discrepancies at the Kessler. Haas had access. His company booked 4 private events through the hotel while I was still coordinating. He could have layered small transfers through the catering invoices. Enough to create a paper trail that looks like I was skimming. Can you prove the transfers originated from his side? Not yet, but I know where to look. Then look fast. Cross's voice was steady, but with an undercurrent she had learned to read. Not fear, urgency. Fintrack has a 48-hour review period before they escalate. If they escalate, they'll freeze accounts. Yours and mine, given that you're on my payroll. Imara was already pulling up files. There's something else, Cross said. She stopped typing. Haas has a contact inside the CRA regional office, a senior assessor named Bellemare, out of the Toronto East District. The Alberta shell companies run through Bellemaire's review portfolio and always come back clean. He's been paying the assessor. For years, by my estimate. Imara looked at the documents open on her screen. Then she looked at the map she had been quietly building for weeks. The Alberta shells, the property chains, the shared registered agent. If I can connect Bellemaire's accounts to the same registered agent network that Haas uses, she said slowly, then the bribe payments are traceable. Through the same structures he used to hide the property fraud. Yes, Cross said. That's not just tax fraud, that's corruption of a federal official. Fintrack would be legally required to escalate to the RCMP. Yes, Cross said again. And Haas would lose everything, the properties, the shell companies, the assessor. His entire infrastructure goes dark at once. Yes. Imara was quiet for a moment. Give me tonight, she said. She did not go home. She sat at her desk on the 49th floor, alone, the city spilling out below her in copper and white, and she worked. She was methodical. She was thorough. She had been called both of those things as criticisms before, and she had collected both as compliments and saved them carefully. She traced the beneficial ownership chains through every Alberta shell company she had identified. She cross-referenced the corporate addresses, the registered agents, the signing authorities. At 12:40 in the morning, she found it, a numbered company used to pay a consulting retainer to a private firm in Ottawa. The Ottawa firm had 2 beneficial owners. One of them was a federal public servant named Gaston Bellemare, CRA Senior Assessor, Toronto East District. She sat back and looked at the screen. The payment trail was not buried deeply. It was buried cleverly, structured to look like a standard consulting arrangement, the amount small enough individually to fall below automatic review thresholds. But now that she knew what she was looking at, it was as obvious as a depreciation schedule, read upside down in a hotel boardroom. At 1:15 in the morning, Imara filed an anonymous suspicious transaction report through Fintrack's secure digital submission portal. She attached the ownership documentation, the payment records, and a detailed explanatory memo, written in the kind of precise technical language that left no room for interpretive error, outlining the connection between Haas Capital, the Alberta shell companies, and Gaston Bellemare. Under Fintrack's legislative mandate, the report triggered an automatic asset review on all named entities within 72 hours. She pressed submit. She watched the confirmation number appear on the screen. Then she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes and listened to the building hum around her. She thought about her father's voice on the phone when she'd told him the insurance had reversed its decision. She thought about the look on Haas's face when he'd said she doesn't know what she's talking about, the reflexive contempt of a man who had never once considered that the woman refilling his water glass might be reading his documents. She thought about the fact that she had not, in the end, needed anyone to rescue her. Morten Haas's accounts were frozen on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the CRA had launched an internal investigation into Gaston Bellarmin. By Tuesday, Haas Capital Developments had ceased operations pending a federal review. Morton Haas issued a statement through a crisis communications firm, citing a desire to cooperate fully with all regulatory inquiries, which was, Imara had learned, what people said when their lawyers had told them that talking was no longer an option. The FinTrack flag on Imara's records was cleared the same week. The irregularities in the Kessler's event budget were traced to a series of catering invoice adjustments originating from a Haas Capital corporate account, planted through the hotel's supplier portal during a private event booking in October, exactly as she had suspected. Cross called her into his office on the Wednesday after everything had settled. She sat down across from him. The lake was visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass, pale and vast under a March sky that couldn't decide between winter and spring. "You didn't tell me you were going to file the FinTrack report yourself," he said. "No. You could have asked legal to handle it." "Legal would have taken 4 days to draft the memo." She held his gaze. "We had 48 hours. Cross studied her. "You were protecting yourself." "I was protecting both of us." She paused. "And I was solving the problem that was in front of me. That's what you hired me to do." He looked out the window for a moment. The slight turn of his jaw, the careful stillness. She had learned to read him well enough to know that this was not indecision. It was the pause before he said something he had already decided. "I owe you a conversation about your future here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I passed the first module of my CPA in January. I'll finish the program by November." "I know. I've seen your results." He turned back to face her. "That's not the conversation I mean." Imara waited. "Cross Capital Partners has a gap in its leadership structure," he said. "My previous CFO left in December. I have been interviewing externally. 11 candidates." He picked up his Mont Blanc pen, old, well-used. She had noticed it before, and set it down again. None of them read upside down. Imara was very still. "You're not offering me the CFO position," she said. "I'm not qualified. I haven't finished my designation." "I am offering you a development pathway that ends at the CFO position," Cross said, "with full executive compensation as of the 1st of next month, and a structural role in all major acquisition reviews." He paused. "You will finish your CPA, you will have the resources to do, and you will have genuine authority in this firm, not a title that is polite decoration." She looked at him. In the long months they had worked together, she had learned that he said precisely what he meant and nothing else. There were no hidden clauses. She had checked. "You're serious," she said. "I am constitutionally incapable of offering something I don't intend to deliver," he said, with the particular dryness that she had stopped mistaking for coldness about 6 months ago. She looked at the lake. She thought about the woman she had been in the Monarch suite. Terrified, overextended, holding a water pitcher like a lifeline. She thought about the choice she had made to speak anyway, before she had time to talk herself out of it. "I want to read the employment agreement before I sign anything," she said. Cross's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it, something that reached his eyes and stayed there. "I would be profoundly concerned if you didn't," he said. She reached across the desk and picked up the Mont Blanc pen. She turned it once in her fingers, the weight of it solid and certain, like a full stop at the end of a very long sentence. She set it back down in front of him. "Draft it. I'll check every line." Outside, the lake caught the first clear light of a March afternoon. Somewhere in the city, Morton Haas was sitting in a room with lawyers who were explaining to him the precise mechanisms of his own undoing. Somewhere to the east, in a rehabilitation center in Scarborough, a man with a slightly slowed voice was getting through another hour of physiotherapy, unaware that the world had just rearranged itself around his daughter. Imara Weston had walked into a boardroom carrying sparkling water, and she had walked out carrying something that had no name yet, only the steady, bone-deep certainty of a woman who had finally stopped being invisible and had no intention of learning how again. She had read every clause. She was not signing anything she hadn't written herself.